Howdy y'all, my name's Sohan and we're here at the beautiful Guanyin Tea House in sunny Austin, Texas. We're here for another episode of Gong Fu Tea Cha, where we teach ya how to make tea. Today's episode is gonna be a piece of cake, a tea cake that is. So why did people press tea into cakes? Oftentimes when people first get introduced to the world of Chinese tea, they are perplexed and fascinated by the presence of these discs and bricks and balls of tea that are pressed into different shapes. And so why do these exist? What kind of tea do we do this with, and why do we do it? Well, generally speaking, when you see a cake of tea, it's either going to be pu-erh tea, either Sheng or Shou Pu'er tea. It can be white tea, which is also aged, and it could be chA. And the essence of pressing tea into cakes is that it puts them into a compact unit so that you can easily store them, easily transport them. And this was originally done as a way of standardizing them into a tradable form. So it makes them fungible. Makes the tea leaves from just being a big mass of tea leaves that you have to weigh out if you want to trade with someone, to being, hey, here's a cake of tea, you know exactly how much it weighs, here's 40 of them, so you know exactly how much to trade for whatever it is you would trade for. What did people trade tea for? Well, one of the main things was livestock, specifically horses. An ancient trade route stretching from Yunnan and Sichuan in the west of China all the way through Tibet, Mongolia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. It's called the Gudao, the ancient tea horse road. And the reason for this is because tea leaving China would go out and get traded for horses from Central Asia primarily, because that's where they invented horses and they have the best horses there. So one of the most famous shapes of tea that we'll see is this guy called the being. It presents as this big flattened disc. A lot of people refer to it as a puck. Which I think is kind of cute. But being basically means cookie or cracker. We still use that word in Chinese to talk about cookies and crackers and cakes of tea. You can say 357 grams. It's a funny number. Well, in ancient Chinese measurements, that was some nice round even number. But in modern grams, a being has been standardized into 357 modern grams. And again, the reason for that is that we would want to trade these with people in exchange for horses or yaks or camels or what have you. So this is one little unit of tea here, a being, a 357 gram being, and 7 beings together is a tong. This here is a tong, and then 40 tongs is a jian. So that's 7 times 40, which is 280, which is the number of beings that you would have traded for a horse. So those are the standard units: being, tong, jian. And they still exist. You can still buy a jian of tea. That is still a unit that you can purchase, especially of pu-erh. And tea comes in other shapes as well. The being is probably the most well-known, and it does come with these cool, you either have these wrapped in bamboo or you have these leather boxes like this, and these is what would make their way down that old tea horse road. And as the tea was making its way down this road, it would get rained on, it would get dewed on, it would ferment. And by the time it had reached its destination, it may have been in storage and in transit for many months, maybe many years, and it has begun to ferment. And so your Tibetans and your Mongolians and your Kazakhs and your Kyrgyz people at the end of this trade route are getting this fermented funky tea, and they're like, well, this is what it's supposed to be like. They didn't know, so they would drink it, and they liked that earthy taste. They developed a flavor for the earthy taste of fermented tea. And they started to value those aged fermented teas. And they're noticing that as they got older, they got funkier and earthier and more desirable. And so that's where the culture of aged tea comes from, is from the ancient tea trade routes, specifically the Gudao, the old tea horse road. And that's why we press tea into cakes, and we do it still because A, it saves space. This is 357 grams of tea, 12 and some change ounces. This would be a whole big puffy bag of tea if it weren't pressed together. It also changes the flavor a little bit. The tea gets steamed before it's pressed, and I find that pressed teas have a little bit more depth and profundity than their unpressed counterparts, even if they're the same tea. And it also changes the dynamics of the way they steep. You have a chunk of tea now that is slowly loosening up and getting saturated with water, and so you get a much sharper bell curve on your steeping profile. So, and just to look at some other shapes of tea, this is a brick of tea, a chajuan, and this is 250 grams, exactly a half kilo, or a quarter kilo, a half jin. And this is a little elephant brick from 2006. We like these a lot. And we'll demonstrate how to open those two. The two main ones that we're going to talk about today are the beings and the bricks. But you do get other shapes. You get a very common shape for pu-erh, is called the tuo, which is a little bowl, and they come big. There's big tuos. I don't have one right now, but here's a mini tuo for you. And you can see there's a little depression here, and it's a little it's a little hemisphere, and then it's flat here, and then you've got a little divot right down in the middle. It looks kind of like a little bowl or a bird's nest. And again, these are traditionally big also. You can have big 500-gram ones of these. Those are from Xiaguan. That's where you have a lot of those tuos. And then, what else have we got? And then we get into the non-pu-erh teas, some chas. This is a Jiang Bao Pian. This is a very, very ancient shape of tea that was used. Again, it's coin-shaped, and if I were to open this up, you would see, what the heck, I'll open it up. We open this up and we see that there is actually, it's a little coin with a little hole in it. It's a little old school Chinese coin, and it's been printed, embossed, and it's got a little hole in it. Hey, isn't that cool? So that really drives home the fact that tea was currency. This is actually shaped like a piece of currency. Oh, not upside down, yeah. And then what else have we got? We've got these guys. This is like a Dragon Ball is what they call these. And this one happens to be of white tea, although you do get these of pu-erh. And these, unlike a little tuo, which I showed you, the mini tuo, these are perfectly round, or more or less, but they don't have that hemisphere and that divot. They are a little sphere like that. And then also beings come in multiple sizes. That 357-gram being is very traditional. Here's a smaller 200-gram being. This is some Bulang Sheng Pu'er. So, as you can see, and there's more than that, you get them shaped like mushrooms, you get them shaped like gourds, you get them pressed into bamboo. Actually, I've got one of the bamboo ones in here. I'll bust it out so everyone can see it. And then this guy was pressed into some bamboo. It's pretty neat, right? Super dense, hard little bamboo Sheng Pu'er. And then this beast over here to my left is a Qingzhuan. This is the king of all the pressed teas. Qingzhuan's from Hubei, just above Hunnan. Hubei means north of the lake, Hunnan means south of the lake, and this is the densest of all the pressed teas. This is a 6-kilogram mama brick, and it's, you know, it sounds like just like knocking on a door. It's super dense. You could definitely knock a human being out with this, not that you'd want to. This one is too dense to cut with a knife, and we cut them instead with a saw, or the people I buy them from cut them with a saw, and you get these little cubes like this, and you can see this is a little cross-section of this guy here. So that covers the different shapes. Now, what do we do with them? Well, obviously, if it's one of these little dudes here, these are great. They're already dosed out. This is 5 grams. You just unwrap it and pop it into a thing. But what if you want to crack open one of these beautiful round beings? Well, I'm going to do it for you today, and you can see how we do it. When opening a being, one uses a pointy object which can be a cha dao tea knife or cha zhen tea needle, again, depending on the shape of the tool, but the point is there's a whole family of tools used specifically to open cakes of tea, and we're going to start by looking at cha dao tea knife. This is my tea knife. This was made for me by Miss Emily Spikeman of Austin, Texas, a jeweler, owner of Clementine & Company Jewelry. So if you want some beautiful jewelry made of brass or copper or silver, then she's great for that. And she used her skills to make for me this beautiful tea knife and wrap it with leather. So this is my fancy tea knife. They're not always as fancy. A more traditional tool, more classic tool that you would see more often would be something like this. This is a very popular model in China because it's sheathed. This is more like a cha zhen tea needle, because you can see it's just a little pointy thing, right? And people like these in China because they're not threatening. You can't accidentally stab yourself with one because they have this neat little cigar-shaped sheath on them. And then, just show you one more for the sake of showing you. This is our tea knife that was custom made for us, actually specifically for our friend Wendell Lewis Day, who it's monogrammed for. Rest in peace, Wendell. But yeah, this is a beautiful Malkame Gane tea knife that was made for us by our local friends who are blacksmiths. So, tea knives, Another fun collectible thing, they come in all different shapes and sizes. I'm gonna use my Spikeman tea knife today, and we're gonna open this Bing here. So, brand new Bing. This is a very exciting feeling. I'm gonna go ahead and unwrap it for you. These beings are usually stamped with the date on the outside. Not always, but because the value of these types of aged pressed teas increases with age, you often get the date. This one doesn't have it. This is a 2005 Sheng Pu'er from the Duoyi patch of Nannuo Mountain that we call Doomroy. I know what it is because I just got it recently, directly from the people who made it. Normally you'd have a date stamped somewhere around here. This one doesn't. And then you also sometimes get an inner ticket pressed inside of it so that the being can't be counterfeited, because otherwise you could take a very old, valuable being wrapper, make a counterfeit wrapper, and wrap a cheap being in it, and so they press these, it's called the neife, the inner ticket, and they'll press these into the being so they can't be counterfeited, because that's the thing, counterfeiting tea, aged tea, that's a real thing, it happens, buyer beware. So, now we're gonna go ahead and get ready to actually cut open this being. We're gonna take our cha dao, our tea knife, firmly in hand. And remember, safety first, we're gonna come down here and we're going to gently wiggle the knife into the tea. What you're gonna wanna do is I like to put my hand over top of the portion that I'm gonna be cutting out, and then my goal is to wiggle my knife in a few inches like that, and then, under the surface, and then holding my hand here, lift up, and that lets me get a nice big chunk of tea without breaking very many leaves. We're gonna do that now. So the way that they make these beings is they take a sack of tea and they steam it, and then they put it under a rock, and so they twist up the knot of the sack and they press it in here, and this is what forms this divot. And that's the weight of the rock pressing the leaves and compressing them. And when we open the being, I like to start either from the side or from this divot itself, but either way, I like to come in laterally like this, parallel to the surface of the being. And the reason for that is, as you can see, the leaves themselves are pressed flat, lateral like that. They're not laying this way. And so when we break the being, if we were to snap off a chunk like that, which is kind of what people tend to want to do, then we're actually breaking the leaves. We're taking the leaves that are lying flat like this and we're snapping them in half, and we don't want to do that. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into keeping these leaves as whole as possible, from picking to processing to pressing, and so we want to maintain those nice whole leaves. And so when we come in, and also because it maintains the nice round shape of the being, and that way when we rewrap it at the end, when we're done using it, we can wrap it up nice and it won't be all funny and lopsided looking. But the main reason is we want to keep those leaves whole. And so when we are cutting the being, we're going to come in, I like to come in from this divot here, and what you're going to want to do is I like to put my hand over top of the portion that I'm going to be cutting out, and then my goal is to wiggle my knife in a few inches like that, and then, under the surface, and then holding my hand here, lift up, and that lets me get a nice big chunk of tea without breaking very many leaves. We're going to do that now. So now that we've broken off a nice sizable chunk of tea off of our being, here we go. We've cut it, we've opened the being. So now we have our loose little chunk. We're gonna break off a chunk just big enough for us to make one pot of tea or one gaiwan full of tea. And so when we're dosing these pressed teas, it's important to remember that the pressed teas are much, much denser than loose teas. If I were making a pot of cha, loose Sheng Pu'er, then I would be using maybe a quarter to a half of the volume of the vessel. But now that we're using these pressed teas, we're gonna use a much smaller amount. So I like to as you all know, I don't really weigh out my teas per se, but I'm just gonna break off a chunk and make a nice strong pot of pu-erh. So I've got this little chunk here, and then I like to include both chunk and some of the shake that breaks off naturally during the opening of the being. You see we have all these loose leaves that come off just naturally from shaking the being. There we go, a whole bunch of loose leaves. That's the shake, is what I call that, of the tea. And so I like to use a little bit of that also. I like to have maybe a 1-to-3 shake to chunk ratio for a Sheng Pu'er like this. And so your shake, why do we put that in there? Well, the shake, and again, we're talking about these loose leaves, not this dust, this powder at the bottom. We don't want to deal with that. That would just pour out and get in people's cups and make the tea bitter. We're just talking about the loose leaves that flake off during the opening process. I like to use a 1-to-3 shake to chunk ratio. And the shake is there to get the pot started. It's like the tinder. It burns up fast. It has high surface area. It steeps quickly. It makes the tea flavorful right from the very beginning. And then these chunks are like our big fat logs. These are what keeps the fire going. And so we want a little bit of tinder. There, just to get it going. And I know that volume-wise, these look similar, but again, because this is pressed, this is a lot more than this shake here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put away our tea cake. I'm not gonna pleat it nice right now. I'll do that later. And get out our gaiwan. Nice little Mary Cotterman gaiwan. And I like to put my shake in first at the bottom, so it stays down under the chunk, keeps those loose leaves from getting there, and then put my chunk right on top. And that's gonna expand, and this is gonna end up filling up this whole gaiwan. This is gonna be a really strong pot of Doomroy, but that's the way we likes it here at Guanyin Tea House. And so I'll just go ahead and let y'all get a glimpse of what that looks like on the inside there. You can see that chunk, there's some shake under it, nice little ratio, nice strong pot of Doomroy. I could have used a little bit less than that, but this is not too much to use in a pot of tea if you really like strong Sheng Pu'er, which I do. So that concludes our being opening tutorial, and our rundown of the pressed teas, which again includes, generally speaking, pu-erhs, white teas, and chas. Those are the teas that generally get pressed. Why do we press them? Because we want them to age. It's a good way to store them. They don't take up much space. It increases the depth of flavor, and when we use them as a trade commodity, it keeps people from getting into disputes about what exactly is getting traded, because you know exactly how much they weigh. Thank you all for joining us on Gong Fu Tea Cha. Please subscribe to our channel, Tea House Ghost, and join us next time for another great episode about how to make tea. Thank you very much. Bada bing.
Bada bing. Bada bing.
I really probably should have worked that in there.